The Bradford name meant everything in Manhattan. Old money, impeccable bloodlines. The kind of influence that could open doors or shatter lives with a single whisper. For 90 years, they'd reigned unchallenged over New York's social elite. Until Vivian Bradford met her match in a white dress. They called it the wedding of the century. Old money meets new love, as Ethan Bradford prepared to marry Naomi Thompson. But when Vivian rose from her front row seat and accused her future daughter-in-law of carrying another man's child, she thought she was simply protecting her family's legacy. She didn't realize she was signing its death warrant. Because in that moment of calculated cruelty, Vivian Bradford made a fatal mistake. She gave Naomi Thompson, brilliant, beautiful, and 7 weeks pregnant with the true Bradford heir, nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous adversary of all. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in Manhattan's scorching social warfare, it burns hot enough to bring down dynasties. And Naomi Thompson is just getting started. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Naomi Thompson stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The wedding dress hugged her curves perfectly, ivory lace cascading down to pool at her feet. She'd dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl, but nothing in those dreams compared to the reality of today. "Girl, you look absolutely stunning," Angela Wilson said, adjusting the train of Naomi's dress. Her best friend since college had tears in her eyes as she stepped back to admire the bride. "Ethan's going to lose his mind when he sees you," Naomi smiled, touching the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from her soon-to-be husband. "I still can't believe this is happening. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." The bridal suite of the St. Andrew's Episcopal Church buzzed with activity as the other bridesmaids put final touches on their makeup and hair. Through the window, Naomi could see guests arriving, their cars filling the parking lot of the historic stone church. The September morning was perfect, crisp and clear, with just enough breeze to rustle the red and gold leaves beginning to turn on the trees lining the church grounds. "Your mother would have been so proud," Angela said softly, squeezing Naomi's hand. "She always said you were destined for great things." Naomi blinked back tears, careful not to ruin her makeup. "I wish she could be here. Dad, too." The car accident that took both her parents 5 years ago still felt fresh sometimes, especially today. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Everyone decent?" a voice called out. "Come in, Mrs. Bradford," Angela responded, smoothing her burgundy bridesmaid dress. Vivian Bradford swept into the room like a cool breeze, perfectly coiffed in her mother of the groom ensemble. Her steel gray hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her pale blue dress probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her eyes landed on Naomi and something flickered across her face, so quick Naomi almost missed it. "Naomi, dear," Vivian said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How are you feeling? Not too nervous, I hope?" She approached, hands clasped in front of her. "Though I suppose some nerves are natural given the circumstances." There it was again, that slight pause, that subtle emphasis that made Naomi feel like she was being judged. She'd gotten used to it over the past year, ever since Ethan had announced their engagement to his family. Vivian Bradford had mastered the art of making her disapproval known while maintaining plausible deniability. "I'm perfect, Vivian," Naomi replied, keeping her voice steady and warm. "Just excited to marry your son." Yes." Vivian's eyes drifted to Naomi's midsection, barely concealed judgment in her gaze. "It's all happening rather quickly, isn't it?" Angela stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between Naomi and Vivian. "Actually, they've been together for 2 years. That seems like plenty of time to know what you want." Vivian's smile tightened. Of course. I just want what's best for my Ethan. He's always been impulsive, rushing into things without thinking them through properly." Before anyone could respond, another knock came at the door. This time, it was the wedding coordinator, clipboard in hand. 20 minutes until showtime, everyone. Mrs. Bradford, we need you in the sanctuary for the family photos. Well, I should go. Vivian paused at the door. Do try to keep calm, dear. You look a bit flushed. As soon as the door closed behind her, Angela let out a low whistle. I swear, that woman could freeze hell with a single look. She's just protective of Ethan, Naomi said, but her voice lacked conviction. She'll come around eventually. Naomi. Angela turned her friend to face her. Something's not right. That woman has been throwing shade since day one, and it's getting worse, not better. Are you sure about this? What do you mean? I mean, are you sure about marrying into that family? About Vivian being your child's grandmother? Angela lowered her voice. Because I've got a car with a full tank of gas, and we can be halfway to Canada before anyone notices we're gone. Naomi laughed, but her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, where her small baby bump was carefully concealed by the careful draping of her dress. She was only 12 weeks along. She and Ethan had only told their immediate families last week. I'm marrying Ethan, not his mother, and he's nothing like her. You know that. Angela didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Okay, but my offer stands. Just give me the signal, and we're out of here faster than you can say, Bridezilla. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Naomi's Uncle Robert arrived to walk her down the aisle, his eyes misty as he saw her in her dress. The bridesmaids lined up, bouquets in hand. Through the doors, Naomi could hear the string quartet beginning to play as guests settled into their seats. Her heart was pounding now, but not with nerves, with anticipation. In just a few minutes, she would walk down that aisle toward Ethan. Sweet, kind Ethan, who had pursued her relentlessly after they met at a charity gala. Ethan, who had looked into her eyes on their third date and told her he was falling in love with her. Ethan, who had dropped to one knee in the middle of Central Park, not caring about the crowd that gathered to watch him propose. The wedding coordinator appeared again, organizing everyone into their positions. Okay, ladies, this is it. Remember, count to 5 between each pair, keep your bouquets at waist height, and smile. The doors opened, and the bridesmaids began their procession. Angela, as maid of honor, turned to give Naomi one last hug, before taking her place in line. You've got this, gorgeous. Show them all what they're dealing with. As the bridal march began to play, Naomi took her uncle's arm. You ready, sweetheart? He asked, patting her hand. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The doors opened wide, and Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The sanctuary was stunning. Flowers in deep burgundy and cream draped every pew, candles flickered in crystal holders, and afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the aisle. But what truly took her breath away was the sight of Ethan standing at the altar. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes fixed on her with such intensity that the rest of the world seemed to fade away. As she began her walk down the aisle, she saw tears forming in his eyes, and her own vision blurred with emotion. The guests rose as she passed, their faces a blur of smiles and tears. She caught glimpses of familiar faces, college friends, work colleagues, Ethan's extended family. In the front row, Vivian Bradford stood with perfect posture, her expression unreadable. When they reached the altar, Uncle Robert kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Ethan's. His fingers were trembling slightly as they clasped hers, and the love in his eyes made her heart soar. You're breathtaking, he whispered as they turned to face the priest. The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing through the sacred space as he welcomed the guests and spoke about the sanctity of marriage. Naomi barely heard the words, too lost in the feeling of Ethan's hand in hers, in the knowledge that in just a few minutes, they would be husband and wife. They had chosen traditional vows, believing that the time-honored words held all the promise and commitment they wanted to express. The priest turned to Ethan first, beginning the familiar phrase, "Do you, Ethan James Bradford, take this woman?" That's when it happened. Wait. The voice cut through the ceremony like a knife. I'm sorry, but I can't let this continue. A collective gasp rippled through the church as Vivian Bradford rose from her seat, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite hide the triumph in her eyes. Mother? Ethan's voice was confused, his hand tightening on Naomi's. What are you doing? I'm protecting you, darling. Vivian's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. I've held my tongue as long as I could, but I cannot in good conscience allow this marriage to take place under false pretenses. Naomi felt her blood run cold. Mrs. Bradford, please. The child she's carrying, Vivian announced, her voice trembling with false emotion. It isn't yours, Ethan. The silence that followed was deafening. Naomi felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. She turned to Ethan, ready to deny the accusation, to fight for their love. But what she saw in his face stopped her cold. Doubt. Clear as day, written across his features. Ethan, she whispered. You can't believe, is it true? He asked, his voice hollow. He had already pulled his hand from hers, taking a small step back. Of course it's not true. Naomi's voice rose with desperation. How could you even ask that? How could you doubt me? But Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were fixed on his mother, who had produced an envelope from her clutch bag. I have proof, Vivian said, her voice thick with fake tears. Text messages, hotel receipts. I didn't want to believe it either. But as a mother, I had to investigate when I saw the signs. What signs? Naomi demanded, but her voice was drowned out by the growing murmur of the guests. She could see phones being raised, recording the scene. This wasn't just a private tragedy. It was becoming a spectacle. Ethan, she tried again, reaching for him. Look at me. You know me. You know I would never. But Ethan had taken another step back, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. In that moment, Naomi saw everything crumbling. Not just their wedding, but their entire relationship. Every laugh, every kiss, every promise. All of it dissolving because he couldn't trust her enough to even question his mother's accusations. I can't, he said quietly. I can't do this. The words fell like physical blows. Naomi stood frozen, her white dress suddenly feeling like a costume, her dreams turning to ashes in her mouth. She was vaguely aware of Angela rushing to her side, of the horrified whispers spreading through the church, of the priest trying to restore order, but all she could focus on was Ethan's back as he walked away from her, following his mother down the aisle and out of the church. He didn't look back once. The beautiful sanctuary, with all its flowers and candles, had become a stage for her humiliation. Hundreds of eyes watched as the bride was abandoned at the altar, as her perfect day shattered into pieces that could never be put back together. Angela's arms were around her, trying to shield her from the stares and the cameras. Come on, honey, let's get you out of here. But Naomi couldn't move. Her feet seemed rooted to the spot where moments ago she had stood ready to pledge her life to a man who had just proved he never really knew her at all. The weight of what had happened, what was still happening, pressed down on her like a physical force. Someone started to cry. One of the bridesmaids maybe, or a guest. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the crowd in silence. People began to move, to talk, to reach for their phones. Naomi could almost see the social media posts being crafted, the videos being uploaded, the scandals spreading beyond these church walls. Please, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to. God, maybe, or fate, or whatever cruel force had orchestrated this moment. Please let this be a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The man she loved had just walked away from her based on nothing but his mother's word. The child growing inside her, their child, had been used as a weapon against her. And her reputation, her dignity, her future, all of it hung in the balance. As Angela and the bridesmaids finally managed to guide her toward the bridal suite, Naomi caught a glimpse of herself in one of the church's decorative mirrors. She looked like a ghost in white, her dark skin ashen. With shock, her carefully applied makeup starting to stream down her cheeks. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it had become the day everything fell apart. But somewhere, beneath the shock and the pain and the humiliation, something else was stirring. Something hard and cold and determined. Because Vivian Bradford had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she had won. Thought she had protected her son from what she saw as an unsuitable match. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that she had just created something far more dangerous than a daughter-in-law she didn't approve of. She had created an enemy who would never stop until justice was served. As the bridal suite door closed behind her, shutting out the chaos and whispers, Naomi made a silent vow. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning, and Vivian Bradford would live to regret the day she decided to mess with the wrong woman. The video went viral before Naomi even made it home from the church. WeddingGate was trending locally, then nationally. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications until Angela finally took it away from her. "You don't need to see this right now," Angela said, helping Naomi out of her wedding dress in her apartment. The ivory lace that had felt so magical hours ago now seemed to mock her. These people don't know anything, but they thought they did. The comments were already flooding in. Who cheats on a Bradford? Gold digger got caught. Guess she thought a baby would seal the deal. Each one cut deeper than the last. Naomi sat on her bed in her silk slip, staring at nothing. "He didn't even ask me if it was true." Her voice was hollow. 2 years together, and he couldn't even give me 5 minutes to explain. A notification pinged on Angela's phone. She hadn't silenced hers yet. Her sharp intake of breath made Naomi look up. What now? Nothing. It's nothing. But Angela's attempt to hide her screen came too late. The Bradford family had released an official statement. Due to personal circumstances, the wedding between Ethan Bradford and Naomi Thompson has been called off. The Bradford family requests privacy during this difficult time. Naomi laughed, but it was a broken sound. Privacy? They want privacy after Vivian turned my wedding into a public circus? Naomi. Angela sat beside her friend, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. We need to get ahead of this. Release your own statement, maybe? Tell your side? And say what? That I'm carrying Ethan's baby? That his mother fabricated everything? Naomi shook her head. They'll just say I'm lying. You saw how quickly Ethan believed her. Why would anyone else believe me? Outside her apartment window, the September evening was settling in. The same day that had dawned so bright with promise was ending in shadows. Her phone, silent now on her dresser, held hundreds of missed calls and messages, some from well-meaning friends, others from journalists hungry for the story, and still others from trolls who'd somehow gotten her number. I should have known, Naomi said quietly. All those little comments from Vivian, those looks. She was never going to accept me. Angela squeezed her shoulder. This isn't about you, honey. This is about her. Her racism. Her control over Ethan. Her... Don't. Naomi stood abruptly. Don't make this about race. She won this round because she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Ethan would believe her without question. She knew people would believe the worst about me without proof. A knock at the door made them both jump. Angela peeked through the peephole, then relaxed. It's just the food I ordered. While Angela paid for the delivery, Naomi caught her reflection in her vanity mirror. Her makeup was smeared, her carefully styled hair falling loose. She looked like a woman who'd been through war, which in a way she had. You need to eat something, Angela said, setting out containers of Chinese food. Think about the baby. The baby. Naomi's hand went to her stomach, still barely showing. Her child, Ethan's child, was the innocent victim in all this. What kind of world would they be born into now? One where their mother was branded a cheater, where their father had abandoned them before they were even born. I can't stay here, Naomi said suddenly. In this city. Everyone knows me, knows what happened. So we'll leave. Take that job offer in Boston you were considering before. Angela stopped herself, but they both knew what she meant. before Ethan had convinced her to stay, to build their life together in his world. Naomi's phone buzzed again, this time with an email. Against her better judgment, she checked it. "My boss wants to meet tomorrow," her voice was flat. "Probably to fire me. They can't fire you for this. They can find a reason. You know how it works. The Bradford family has connections everywhere in this city. Who's going to want to work? With the woman who supposedly tried to trap their golden boy with another man's baby." As if to prove her point, another notification popped up, this time a screenshot from someone she'd thought was a friend. It showed Vivian Bradford at some charity event earlier that evening, playing the role of the concerned mother perfectly. She seemed so lovely. The caption read, quoting Vivian, "We welcomed her into our family, but a mother knows when something isn't right. I had to protect my son." The nausea hit suddenly, and Naomi barely made it to the bathroom in time. Morning sickness, stress, fury. She wasn't sure which was to blame. Maybe all three. Angela held her hair back, just like she had during their college days. "That's it. You're staying with me tonight. Pack a bag." But Naomi shook her head, wiping her mouth. "No. I need to face this. Running away is exactly what they expect me to do. It's not running away to take care of yourself. You don't understand." Naomi stood gripping the sink. "If I leave now, if I hide, they win. Vivian gets exactly what she wanted. Me gone from her perfect world. Her son safe from the woman who dared to think she was good enough for him." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm not going to give her that satisfaction. I'm going to stay right here, have this baby, and build something so much bigger than anything the Bradfords could have given me." Angela studied her friend's face, seeing the steel beneath the tears. "Okay, but you're not doing it alone. I'm calling in sick tomorrow, and we're going to figure this out." That night, as Angela slept on her couch, Naomi lay awake in her bed. Her wedding dress hung in the corner, a ghostly reminder of everything she'd lost. No. Everything that had been taken from her. Her phone lit up with a text. Her heart jumped, thinking for a split second it might be Ethan. But no. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Is it true?" the message read. "Did you really cheat on Ethan Bradford?" With trembling fingers, she blocked the number. Then another message came, and another. The story was spreading, morphing, taking on a life of its own. By morning, she knew there would be a dozen different versions, each worse than the last. She thought of Ethan, wondering if he was lying awake too. Was he questioning his decision, remembering their life together? Or was he already letting his mother reshape his memories, paint her as the villain she'd decided Naomi must be? The baby moved, just a flutter, so slight she might have imagined it. But it reminded her that she wasn't alone. She had something to fight for, something more precious than the Bradford name or Vivian's approval. Morning came too quickly, sunlight creeping through her windows like an unwelcome guest. Angela was already up, making coffee she knew Naomi couldn't drink, trying to create some semblance of normalcy. "Your meeting isn't until 10, she said, pushing a cup of herbal tea across the counter. "We have time to prepare." Naomi nodded, her face set in determination. She'd spent the sleepless night thinking, planning, remembering every slight, every microaggression, every moment Vivian had tried to make her feel small. "I need a lawyer," she said. "Not for a lawsuit, not yet, but I need to protect myself and my baby." "I know someone," Angela replied. "Sarah Parker. She specializes in family law, and she's not afraid of big names." As Naomi dressed for her meeting, a black dress that felt appropriately funeral-like, she made a mental list. She needed to close their joint accounts before Ethan could empty them, change her emergency contacts at work and the doctor's office, cancel the honeymoon arrangements. Each task was like a small death, dismantling the life they'd planned piece by piece. The lobby of her office building felt different now. Eyes followed her as she walked to the elevator, whispers trailing in her wake. She held her head high, refusing to let them see her break. Her boss was waiting, his face grave. "Naomi, please sit down." She did, her back straight, her expression neutral. She wouldn't cry here, she wouldn't give them that. "Given the circumstances," he began, "we think it might be best if you took some time off. Paid leave, of course." "You mean hide until the scandal blows over?" Her voice was steady. "I'm pregnant, not sick, and nothing that happened yesterday affects my ability to do my job." He shifted uncomfortably. "The Bradford family has no say in my employment." She met his eyes. "But if you're planning to fire me, I should warn you that pregnancy discrimination is illegal, and I've documented every interaction I've had with this company regarding my condition." The meeting ended with her still employed, though she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. It wouldn't last. She knew that. But she'd bought herself time, and time was what she needed most right now. By the time she left the office, 3 more stories had broken online. Someone had dug up photos of her with male friends, suggesting each one might be her real baby daddy. Another had interviewed a close friend of Ethan's who claimed she'd been acting suspicious for months. And then there was the photo that stopped her in her tracks. Ethan at a restaurant with a blonde woman, Vivian, beaming beside them. The caption read, "Moving on already? Ethan Bradford spotted with socialite Jessica White just days after wedding scandal." Days? It hadn't even been 24 hours. Something inside Naomi hardened, like metal being forged in fire. She'd been playing defense, trying to survive the onslaught, but that wasn't enough anymore. "Get me that lawyer's number," she texted Angela. "It's time to fight back." Because Vivian Bradford had made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed Naomi would crumble, that the weight of public shame and lost love would crush her. She'd thought Naomi was just another obstacle to remove from her son's path, but she'd underestimated the woman she'd tried to destroy. Naomi wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child, for her dignity, for every person who'd ever been judged and found wanting by people like Vivian Bradford, and she was just getting started. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Naomi sat across from her therapist, Dr. Lauren Bennett, in a sunlit office overlooking the city. Her baby bump was now visible beneath her designer dress, a reminder of both what she'd lost and what she was fighting for. "I closed on my first property yesterday," Naomi said, a small smile playing at her lips. "A brownstone in need of renovation. Everyone said I was crazy to start a real estate business now, but you proved them wrong," Dr. Bennett finished, returning the smile. "How does that feel?" "Like breathing again." Naomi touched her stomach absently. "For weeks after everything, I could barely get out of bed. Now I'm creating something of my own." The therapy sessions had been Angela's idea, and possibly her best one yet. Dr. Bennett had helped Naomi channel her pain into purpose, her humiliation into determination. "Have you heard from Ethan?" Dr. Bennett asked carefully. Naomi's smile faded. "Not directly, but his new girlfriend's all over social media." Jessica White, with her perfect blonde hair and society connections, was everything Vivian Bradford had wanted for her son. "They're calling it a whirlwind romance, and how does that make you feel?" "Honestly," Naomi straightened in her chair, "it makes me work harder. Every time I see them in some society page, I close another deal." She didn't mention the nights she still cried, the moments when pregnancy hormones and memories collided, leaving her raw. Those were getting fewer, replaced by a steely resolve that surprised even her. After the session, Naomi headed to her new office in downtown. Thompson Real Estate Development was small but growing. She'd used her savings and a loan from her uncle to start it, refusing to touch the money Ethan had given her. Pride, maybe, or just the need to prove she could do it alone. Angela was waiting, in the office, practically bouncing with excitement. "You're not going to believe what Sarah found." Sarah Parker, Naomi's lawyer, had been digging into the Bradford family's business dealings, looking for leverage. Not for revenge, Naomi insisted, but for protection. The Bradfords' influence ran deep, and she needed to safeguard her future. "What is it?" Angela handed her a folder. "Read it yourself, but sit down first." The documents were old, yellowed paper with faded ink. Birth certificates, adoption records, court filings. At first, Naomi couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then, oh my God. She sank into her chair. Ethan is adopted? Sealed records from 1995, Angela confirmed. Vivian and James Bradford adopted him when he was 6 months old. They kept it completely quiet, even changed his birth certificate. Naomi's hands shook as she read the details. Ethan's birth mother had been young, unmarried. The Bradfords had arranged everything through a private agency, then moved to a new city where no one knew them. The woman who accused me of carrying another man's child, Naomi said slowly, isn't even Ethan's biological mother. The hypocrisy is stunning, isn't it? Sarah Parker strode in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. And it gets better. I found a clause in James Bradford's will, the one Vivian's been living off since his death. The bulk of the estate is meant to pass directly to Ethan's firstborn child. My baby, Naomi whispered. Your baby, Sarah confirmed. Vivian only has access to the money until the heir comes of age, which means... She tried to destroy me to protect her lifestyle. The pieces clicked into place. If Ethan had married, someone else, had children with them. Those children would inherit everything, Sarah finished. But your child, the one she tried to deny, is the rightful heir. Naomi stared out her office window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably with Jessica, letting his mother orchestrate his life just as she always had. Did he know he was adopted? Did he realize his mother's accusations were tainted with desperation as much as prejudice? What do you want to do? Angela asked softly. It was a loaded question. She could expose everything. The adoption, the inheritance, the lies. She could watch Vivian's carefully constructed world crumble just as her own had. But Naomi thought of her child, growing stronger every day. What kind of mother did she want to be? One who sought revenge? Or one who built something positive from the ashes of betrayal? Set up a meeting, she finally said. With Ethan. Alone. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's wise? He deserves to know the truth. What he does with it. Naomi placed a hand on her bump. That's his choice. But I won't be like Vivian. I won't build my life on lies. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah drafted documents. Angela ran interference with the press. And Naomi tried to find the words to tell a man he'd been lied to his entire life. She chose a quiet cafe across town, away from the usual society haunts. When Ethan walked in, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the months had aged him more than they should have. Naomi. He stopped short at her table, his eyes going to her visible pregnancy. You look pregnant? She supplied. That tends to happen over 5 months. He sat heavily, unable to take his eyes off her bump. I've thought about reaching out, but your mother advised against it? The words came out sharper than intended. It's not like that. I've been trying to figure things out, sort through everything. Well, I'm about to make that more complicated. Naomi slid the folder across the table. You should read this. She watched his face as he read, saw the color drain from it, saw the moment his world tilted on its axis, just as hers had months ago. This can't be real, he whispered. It is. Every document has been verified. Your mother, Vivian, she's been lying to you your whole life. Why? His voice cracked. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve the truth. And because the woman who accused me of lying about my baby's father has been lying about being your mother for 28 years. The irony hit him like a physical blow. She could see it in the way he flinched, in how his hands trembled as he reread the documents. There's more, she said quietly, about your father's will, about why Vivian was so desperate to break us up. But that can wait. You need time to process this. Did you know? He looked up, his eyes haunted. Before the wedding? No. Sarah found, while investigating your family's business holdings. I needed to protect myself and the baby after everything. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I don't know what to say, what to think. I know the feeling. Naomi stood, gathering her purse. Take the documents. Talk to Sarah if you want verification. But Ethan? She waited until he met her eyes. Think about why she did it. Why she was so quick to accuse me of lying about our baby. Sometimes people project their own guilt onto others. She left him there, staring at the proof of his mother's deception. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of falling leaves. She felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the truth had lifted a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. Her phone buzzed, another client interested in one of her properties. Life was moving forward, reshaping itself into something new and unexpected. She thought of the ultrasound picture in her purse, of the little girl who would carry both her strength and her father's heritage, whether Vivian Bradford approved or not. Back at her office, Angela was waiting with tea and concern. How did it go? Like ripping off a bandage, Naomi said. Quick, painful, but necessary. And now? Naomi looked at the vision board she'd created for her company. Properties she wanted to develop, communities she wanted to build. Now we wait. Ethan will either confront his mother or let her continue controlling him. Either way. She smiled, touching the ultrasound picture on her desk. We're going to be just fine. But as she said the words, her phone lit up with Ethan's name. His message was simple. Can we talk again? There's something you need to know too. Naomi stared at the screen, her heart racing. After months of silence, after everything that had happened, Ethan Bradford was finally ready to talk. And somehow she knew nothing would ever be the same again. They met at Naomi's office this time. It felt more appropriate somehow, her territory, her terms. The space reflected her new life, modern, elegant, and completely separate from the Bradford world she'd almost married into. Ethan looked worse than he had at the cafe. His normally pristine appearance was slightly disheveled, his blue eyes haunted. He'd clearly spent the past few days doing his own digging. I talked to my birth mother, he said without preamble, sinking into the chair across from Naomi's desk. Her name is Rachel. She lives in Seattle now. She's been trying to contact me for years, but Vivian? He swallowed hard. Vivian intercepted every letter, every attempt. Naomi leaned back, one hand resting protectively on her bump. That must have been overwhelming. She kept everything. Every single letter, every photo Rachel sent. I found them in her study, hidden in a locked drawer. 28 years of lies, all perfectly organized in manila folders. The bitterness in his voice was new. The Ethan she'd known had always spoken of his mother with unwavering devotion. Now he sounded like a man whose foundations had been shattered. There's more, he continued. About the wedding, about why she... He met Naomi's eyes. I found proof that she fabricated everything. The texts, the hotel receipts, all of it was manufactured. She had her assistant create fake documents, plant false evidence. Despite having suspected as much, hearing it confirmed made Naomi's chest tight. And you believe it now, after all this time? I found the original files on her computer, plus emails to her assistant discussing how to make it all look authentic. He ran a hand through his hair. God, Naomi, I was such a fool. I let her manipulate. Me let her destroy us, and for what? To keep control of money that was never even hers to begin with? The inheritance clause, Naomi said quietly. Yes, no, I mean, that was part of it, but... He leaned forward. She was afraid of losing everything. Not just the money, but her position, her influence. A black daughter-in-law who came from new money. That threatened her whole carefully constructed world. The words hung between them, finally acknowledging what had always gone unspoken in their relationship. Naomi felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. So what now? She asked. You've discovered your mother's lies. You've talked to your birth mother. Where does that leave us? I ended things with Jessica, he said quickly. That whole relationship was Vivian's orchestration, just like everything else in my life. Apparently, that's not an answer to my question. I know. He stood, pacing the office. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I betrayed you in the worst possible way. I let my mother's racism and manipulation destroy the best thing in my life. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or try to win you back. Then why are you here? Because you deserve to hear all of this from me. Because our daughter deserves to know her father isn't the coward who walked away from her mother without a second thought. I was weak and blind, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. Naomi felt the baby kick, a strong movement that made her wince. She's active today. Ethan's eyes went to her stomach, longing clear on his face. She? Yes. Found out last week. Naomi shifted in her chair. I was going to have my lawyer contact you about custody arrangements. I want to be in her life, he said quickly, in whatever way you'll allow. But first. His jaw set in a determined line. I need to deal with Vivian. As if summoned by her name, Naomi's office door burst open. Vivian Bradford stood there, impeccably dressed as always, but her usual composure was cracking. So this is where you've been, she spat at Ethan, letting her poison you with more lies? The only liar here is you, mother. The way he said mother made it sound like a curse. Or should I even call you that? Vivian paled. Who told you? What lies has she been spreading? Lies? Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like the lies about Rachel's letters, the lies about Naomi's pregnancy, the fake evidence you created to destroy my wedding. I did what I had to do to protect you. Protect me. Ethan's voice rose. You've been protecting yourself, your lifestyle, your social standing, your control over my life. Everything I did was for you. Vivian's carefully maintained facade was crumbling. That woman would have ruined you, dragged you down to her level. My level? Naomi stood, her voice cutting through the tension. And what level is that, Vivian? The level where I built my own business, where I stayed strong despite your attempts to destroy me. Or is it just the color of my skin that offends you so much? How dare you accuse me of what? Racism? Manipulation? Lying about your own son's adoption while accusing his fiancée of lying about her baby's paternity? Naomi stepped around her desk. You're not even subtle anymore, Vivian. You're just desperate. I am still a Bradford, Vivian hissed. I still have influence in this city. No, mother, Ethan cut in. You have Dad's name and his money, money that rightfully belongs to my child. The child you tried to deny was mine. I was trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. The only mistake, Ethan said quietly, was letting you control my life for so long. It ends now. Vivian's eyes darted between them, calculation replacing panic. You can't prove anything. Those documents could be forged, and who would believe I have the original adoption papers? Ethan interrupted. And Rachel's letters, and the emails to your assistant about creating fake evidence. Would you like me to continue? The color drained from Vivian's face. You went through my private files? Like you went through my life? Controlled my relationships? Hid my birth mother from me? Each question was like a hammer blow. Did you really think I'd never find out? I raised you, Vivian whispered. I gave you everything. You gave me a life built on lies. Ethan's voice was firm. And now you're going to face the consequences. What are you going to do? For the first time, real fear crept into Vivian's voice. Expose me? Ruin our family name? Our family name? Ethan laughed. I'm not even a Bradford by blood, remember? No, mother, I'm going to do something much worse. He stepped closer to her. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. And then I'm going to walk away and let you live with the fallout. You wouldn't dare. Try me. His voice was cold. The society papers you love so much would have a field day with this story. The prestigious Vivian Bradford, exposed as a manipulative liar who destroyed her own son's happiness to maintain her social position. Naomi watched the exchange silently, one hand still resting on her bump. This was Ethan, as she'd never seen. Him, strong, decisive, finally free of his mother's influence. "Get out of my office," she said quietly to Vivian. "You've done enough damage." "This isn't over," Vivian snarled, but her usual authority was gone. "Yes, it is." Ethan moved too. "Stand beside Naomi. You've lost, Mother. The only question is how much more you'll lose before you accept it." After Vivian stormed out, silence fell over the office. Naomi could feel Ethan's presence beside her, solid and uncertain at the same time. "I should go too," he said finally. "You probably need time to process all this, Ethan." She turned to face him. "What you said before, about regret and cowardice, I appreciate your honesty, but this doesn't fix everything." "I know." He nodded. "I don't expect it to. I just want a chance to be a father to our daughter, to prove that I'm not the man who walked away that day." Naomi thought of all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, all the times she'd had to hold her head high while people whispered behind her back. The wound was still fresh, still bleeding. "We'll need to establish boundaries," she said. "Legal agreements about custody and support, and I need time. Time to trust you again, even just as a co-parent." "I understand." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, seeing what you've built, I'm proud of you, Naomi. You're stronger than I ever was." After he left, Naomi sank into her chair, emotionally drained. Her phone buzzed. Angela, checking in. "You okay?" the text read. Naomi looked around her office at the evidence of the life she'd built from the ashes of Vivian's destruction. She thought of Ethan, finally breaking free of his mother's control, and of the daughter growing inside her who would never have to doubt her own strength. "No," she texted back, "but I will be." Because for the first time since that day at the altar, she felt like she could breathe again. The truth was out, justice was coming, and Vivian Bradford's carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down, and Naomi would be there to watch it fall, standing tall, on her own terms. 2 days after the confrontation in Naomi's office, Ethan sat across from his family's longtime lawyer, Thomas Whitfield, in the elegant conference room of Whitfield and Associates. The mahogany table between them was covered with documents, the Bradford family's carefully guarded secrets laid bare. "So it's all true," Ethan said, staring at his father's will. "The inheritance, the adoption records, everything." Thomas removed his reading glasses with a tired sigh. "Your father wanted to tell you about the adoption before he died." Vivian convinced him otherwise. "You mean she threatened him?" The bitterness in Ethan's voice was sharp. James was already sick by then. She argued it would only cause him unnecessary stress. Thomas shuffled through the papers, but he was determined to protect his grandchild's inheritance. That clause was his way of ensuring the family legacy would pass to the next generation, regardless of Vivian's interference. And she's been living off that money ever since, knowing it wasn't really hers to keep. Ethan stood, pacing the room. "Does she have any legal right to it?" "She has control until your child turns 25. But given recent events," Thomas pulled out another document, "we might be able to challenge that." Across town, Naomi was having her own legal meeting. Sarah Parker spread a different set of documents across her desk, her expression triumphant. Vivian's assistant rolled over. "Completely," Sarah said. "Signed a full confession about creating the fake evidence for the wedding. Apparently, your public humiliation wasn't enough. Vivian's been shorting her pay for years." Naomi touched her bump absently, feeling her daughter kick. "And the inheritance?" "Ironclad. Once your daughter is born, she'll be the legal heir to the entire Bradford fortune. Vivian can fight it, but she'll lose." "I don't care about the money," Naomi said quietly. "I care about making sure that woman can never hurt my child the way she hurt Ethan." Sarah's expression softened. From what I'm hearing, you won't have to worry about that. Vivian's world is imploding faster than we expected. She wasn't exaggerating. By that evening, the first society whispers had begun. Vivian's carefully cultivated social circle was buzzing with rumors. Her closest friends suddenly remembered times she'd seemed off or unstable. The same people who'd shunned Naomi after the wedding were now reaching out, trying to align themselves with the woman who'd survived Vivian Bradford's manipulation. Naomi ignored most of their calls, focusing instead on her growing business. But she couldn't ignore the text from Ethan. She's trying to sell the house. The Bradford mansion, the symbol of everything Vivian had schemed to protect, was being quietly listed with a rival real estate firm. The irony wasn't lost on Naomi. "Let me handle it," she texted back. Then she made a call to her newest client, a tech billionaire looking for exactly that kind of property. When Vivian arrived for her showing the next morning, she found Naomi waiting in her own foyer. "What are you doing in my house?" Vivian's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Actually," Naomi said, stepping forward, "according to these documents, this house belongs to the Bradford Trust, the same trust that will pass to my daughter." She patted her bump meaningfully. "Your granddaughter. You have no right. I have every right." Naomi's voice was calm, professional. "As a matter of fact, I already have an offer from a qualified buyer, well above market value." Vivian's perfectly made-up face paled. "You can't sell my home." "Your home?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "The home you're trying to secretly sell before the truth comes out? Before your society friends realize you've been living on borrowed time and stolen money?" "I built this life," Vivian hissed. "Everything the Bradford name stands for lies," Naomi cut in. "Lies about your son's adoption, lies about my pregnancy, lies about your right to any of this." She gestured at the opulent surroundings. "And now everyone's going to know." As if on cue, Vivian's phone began to buzz. The first news story had broken, not in the society pages but in the Wall Street Journal. Bradford family scandal. Inheritance dispute reveals decades of deception. Naomi watched as Vivian read the headline, saw the moment reality finally hit her. The reporter seemed particularly interested in how you faked evidence to break up your son's wedding, she said quietly. "Apparently that kind of malicious manipulation makes for compelling reading." "Ethan would never allow this," Vivian whispered. "Ethan provided half the documentation." Naomi moved toward the door. "You should have thought about consequences before you tried to destroy me." She left Vivian standing in her soon-to-be-lost mansion, surrounded by the trappings of a life built on deception. Outside, Naomi took a deep breath of autumn air, feeling lighter than she had in months. Her phone buzzed again. Angela this time. "Have you seen it?" "The article?" "Just left." Vivian, after she read it. "No, social media, the story's everywhere, the Bradford scandal is trending." Naomi smiled as she got into her car. The same platforms that had once spread lies about her were now spreading the truth about Vivian. Karma, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Back at her office, she found Ethan waiting. He looked different, more relaxed, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. "I just got off the phone with Rachel," he said. "My birth mother. She's flying in tomorrow." Naomi sat behind her desk, maintaining the professional distance they'd established. "Are you ready for that?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm done letting fear control my life. Done being the man Vivian raised me to be." "And who is that man, Ethan?" He met her eyes. "A coward. Someone who let his mother's prejudices and lies destroy the best thing in his life. Someone who didn't deserve you." The baby kicked, making Naomi wince. Ethan noticed, concern crossing his face. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, strong, like her mother." Naomi softened slightly. "And hopefully brave, like her father is finally learning to be." "I'd like to be there," he said quietly. "When she's born." "Not in the room," he added quickly, "but at the hospital. If you'll let me." Naomi thought about it. The hurt was still there, the trust still broken. But she thought about their daughter, about the kind of parents they needed to be. "Okay," she said, "but we do this right. Legal agreements, clear boundaries, everything in writing." "Anything you want." He stood, relief clear on his face. "I know I can't fix what I broke, Naomi, but I can try to be worthy of being her father." After he left, Naomi opened her laptop to find her inbox flooded. The story had exploded. Former Bradford employees were coming forward with their own stories of Vivian's manipulation. Society matrons were distancing themselves, rewriting history to cast themselves as having always suspected something wasn't right. Sarah called with updates. "Vivian's trying to access offshore accounts, but we've frozen everything. The trust administrators are backing us completely. She's running out of options." "And running out of friends," Naomi added, scanning another article. This one detailed Vivian's history of social machinations, complete with quotes from former victims of her schemes. "You know she won't go down quietly," Sarah warned. "Let her fight," Naomi said, touching her bump. "I'm not afraid of her anymore." That evening, as Naomi sat in her new apartment overlooking the city, she thought about power. Not the kind Vivian had wielded, based on money and social position and other people's fear. Real power, the kind that came from surviving, from building something new from the ashes of destruction. Her phone lit up with a text from Angela. "Drinks to celebrate? Virgin mocktail for Mama?" Naomi smiled, remembering all the times Angela had held her while she cried, had believed in her when the world seemed to be falling apart. "Meet you in 20, she replied. As she gathered her things, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked different too, stronger, more confident. The woman Vivian had tried to destroy had become someone new, someone unbreakable. Let Vivian plot and scheme, she thought. The time for hiding behind social niceties and polite facades was over. The truth was out, justice was coming, and Naomi Thompson was done playing by Vivian Bradford's rules. The game had changed, and this. So Naomi was writing the rules. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of pink and gold. In her penthouse apartment, Vivian Bradford hadn't slept. She'd spent the night surrounded by papers, photographs, and decades of carefully preserved lies. The woman who had once ruled New York society was now desperately searching for a way to save herself. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with social invitations and charity committee updates, lay silent. The few calls she received were from her lawyers, each bringing worse news than the last. Her social media accounts, normally filled with photos of galas and fundraisers, were flooded with negative comments. At precisely 7 a.m. she made a call. "Everything's ready?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. "You're certain these will hold up?" The answer must have satisfied her, because she smiled for the first time in days. "Good. Meet me at the mansion at noon. It's time to end this." Across town, Naomi sat in her weekly doctor's appointment, watching her daughter's image on the ultrasound screen. At 7 months, the baby was active, strong, just like her mother. "She's perfect," the doctor assured her. "Despite all the stress you've been under, she's developing beautifully." Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Turn on the news. Now." The doctor's office had a television in the waiting room, perpetually tuned to local news. Naomi emerged, just in time to see Vivian Bradford step up to a hastily assembled podium on the steps of the Bradford mansion. "This isn't going to be good," she murmured, already dialing Sarah Parker's number. On screen, Vivian looked every inch the society matron she'd always been. Expertly coiffed hair, designer suit, perfect makeup. But there was something desperate in her eyes, something wild behind the polished facade. "I stand before you today," Vivian began, her voice carrying across the assembled reporters, "to address the malicious lies being spread about my family." Sarah answered on the first ring. "I'm already watching. Stay where you are. We've got this handled." But Naomi couldn't stay away. She ordered her driver to take her to her office, where Angela was waiting with the live stream already playing on a large screen. "I have proof," Vivian was saying, holding up a thick manila folder, "that Naomi Thompson orchestrated this entire situation. She conspired with members of our staff, paid substantial sums to create false documents, all to gain control of the Bradford fortune. Angela snorted. Is she seriously trying this again? Shh, Naomi hushed her, watching intently, as Vivian began pulling out documents. These bank statements, Vivian continued, her hands shaking slightly as she held up papers, prove that Ms. Thompson paid over $50,000 to create false evidence about the adoption records. She invented this entire story to gain control of the Bradford fortune. The reporters began shouting questions, cameras flashing. Vivian's triumph lasted exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds. That's when Thomas Whitfield stepped out from the crowd. Naomi hadn't seen Ethan's family lawyer since the day he'd confirmed her pregnancy. He looked exactly the same, distinguished, calm, and utterly unflappable. Mrs. Bradford, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Are you referring to these documents? He held up his own folder. Because I have here a sworn affidavit from your personal assistant detailing how you ordered her to create these exact forgeries. Yesterday, the blood drained from Vivian's face. For a moment, she looked her age. All the careful makeup and expensive procedures couldn't hide her shock. Thomas, she managed. What are you doing? My job, Mrs. Bradford. Protecting the Bradford legacy. The real one, not the fiction you've created. He turned to address the reporters directly. I have copies for all of you, including surveillance footage from Mrs. Bradford's home office, showing her assistant creating these documents under duress. Vivian's hands began to shake violently. The folder she held scattered papers across the mansion steps. Papers that, on closer camera inspection, still had fresh printer marks. You're lying, she said. But her voice had lost its authority. You can't prove... Actually, a new voice cut in. He can. The cameras swung to capture a town car pulling up to the curb. Ethan emerged first, looking more confident than he had in months. But it was the woman who stepped out after him that caused the real stir. Rachel Taylor was everything Vivian Bradford wasn't. Naturally elegant, warmly dignified, and unmistakably Ethan's birth mother. They had the same blue eyes, the same determined set of their jaws. Mother, Ethan said, climbing the steps to face Vivian. The word dripped with irony. I think it's time to stop. Ethan, darling. Vivian reached for him, her voice taking on the manipulative tone she'd used all his life. You don't understand what's happening. These people are trying to destroy our family. Our family, Ethan cut her off. The family you built on lies? The one where you hid my adoption, intercepted letters from my birth mother, and tried to destroy the woman carrying your grandchild? I did everything for you. No. Rachel's voice was soft, but carried clearly in the sudden. Hush. You did everything for yourself, Vivian. You kept my son from me for 28 years. You tried to deny your own grandchild. When does it end? The reporters were in a frenzy now, cameras capturing every moment of Vivian Bradford's public unraveling. She looked wildly around, searching for an ally, finding none. The documents? She tried again, gesturing at the scattered papers. They prove that you committed fraud, Thomas interrupted, stepping closer. Again. We have your assistant's full confession, time-stamped security footage, and the original files from your computer showing when these forgeries were created. Would you like me to continue? In her office, Naomi watched as the woman who had humiliated her at the altar, who had tried to destroy her life and deny her child, finally faced the consequences of her actions. The police are here, Angela noted, pointing to the screen where officers were approaching the mansion steps. 2. Detectives moved through the crowd of reporters. Mrs. Bradford, one began, we have a warrant for your arrest. This is ridiculous. Vivian backed away, her heel catching on one of her scattered forgeries. Do you know who I am? Yes, ma'am. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempting to file false documents. You have the right to remain silent. As the officers led Vivian away in handcuffs, the cameras caught every moment. The Society Queen's carefully constructed world had crumbled in less than 15 minutes. Naomi felt no joy watching it happen. Instead, she felt a profound, Sense of closure, of justice finally being served. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "It's over. Can we talk?" An hour later, they sat in her office, Ethan, Rachel, and Naomi, while Sarah Parker outlined the legal implications of the day's events. Vivian will face criminal charges for fraud and potentially extortion, Sarah explained, spreading documents across Naomi's desk. The trust administrators have already begun the process of removing her control over the Bradford assets. And given today's performance, no judge will question the need to protect your daughter's inheritance. Rachel reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that it made Naomi's heart ache for all the years they'd lost. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this," Rachel said softly. "I'm sorry she kept us apart for so long," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. Then, to Naomi, "And I'm sorry I ever doubted you, that I let her manipulate me for so long." Naomi met his eyes, seeing real remorse there. "You were raised by a master manipulator, Ethan. The question is, what are you going to teach our daughter about trust and truth?" "I'd like to teach her together," he said quietly. "Not as a couple, I know that's not possible anymore, but as parents who learned from their mistakes." The baby kicked, as if responding to her father's voice. Naomi smiled slightly, remembering all the dreams she'd had about their family, all the plans that had shattered that day at the altar. "One day at a time," she said finally. "We start with honesty and build from there." Sarah cleared her throat. "There's one more thing you should know. The police found something else while searching Vivian's study. Decades of surveillance. Reports. She had private investigators following both of you, collecting information she could use if needed. That's how she knew about my pregnancy so quickly," Naomi realized. "She had someone watching me." "She had someone watching everyone," Sarah confirmed. "The files go back years. She kept detailed records of potential threats to her position, blackmail material on social rivals, everything. She really was running her own little empire," Rachel mused, "all built on secrets and lies." "Well," Naomi said, standing carefully, one hand supporting her bump, "I prefer to build with something stronger." Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, Naomi stood in her office looking out at the skyline. The news was full of Vivian's arrest, of the Bradford scandal, of the prodigal son reunited with his birth mother. Angela joined her at the window, holding out a cup of herbal tea. "How are you really feeling?" "Tired," Naomi admitted. "Relieved. A little sad, maybe." "Sad. After everything she did? Not for Vivian, for the family we could have been if she'd chosen love over control. For Ethan growing up with lies. For my daughter who'll have to learn about all this someday." "Your daughter," Angela said firmly, "will learn that her mother is the strongest person I know, that when life knocked you down, you built something better. That's a pretty amazing legacy." Naomi touched her bump, feeling her daughter move. "Better than the Bradford legacy?" 1,000 times better. They stood together watching the city lights come alive. Somewhere in those streets, Vivian Bradford was spending her first night in custody, her carefully constructed world in ruins. Somewhere else, Ethan and Rachel were making up for lost time, healing wounds that were decades old. And here, in this office she'd built from the ashes of betrayal, Naomi Thompson was already thinking about tomorrow, about the properties she wanted to develop, the changes she wanted to make in her community, the mother she wanted to be. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Sarah. "Final papers ready to sign tomorrow. Your daughter's future is secure." Naomi smiled, thinking of all the times Vivian had tried to make her feel small, inadequate, unworthy. Now the society queen was facing criminal charges, while the woman she'd tried to destroy was stronger than ever. That was the real victory. Not watching Vivian's destruction, but creating something beautiful from the wreckage she'd left behind. Something that would last long after the scandal faded, and the Bradford name became just another cautionary tale in New York's social history. Something worthy of the daughter who would carry forward a new legacy, built on truth instead of lies, strength instead of manipulation, love instead of control. That was a victory worth celebrating. Autumn turned to winter, and Thompson Real Estate Development opened its third office. Naomi stood at the podium during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her 8-month baby bump prominent beneath her designer dress. Business journals had started calling her the Phoenix of Manhattan real estate, the woman who rose from public humiliation to build an empire. "Our latest project isn't just about property development," she told the gathered crowd. "It's about building communities, creating spaces where families can thrive." She didn't mention that the property she'd just acquired had once been slated for a Bradford Enterprises development. She didn't have to. Meanwhile, across town, Vivian Bradford sat in her attorney's office, facing the ruins of her life. The criminal charges were ironclad, her social circle had evaporated, and the Bradford mansion, her pride and joy, was being transformed into luxury condominiums by none other than Thompson Real Estate. "The plea deal is your best option," her lawyer advised. "The evidence is overwhelming." Vivian, stripped of her designer clothes and signature jewelry, looked decades older. "And my assets?" "Frozen, pending the completion of the trust transfer. The judge was quite clear. You violated your fiduciary duties. Everything goes to the trust administrators until your granddaughter turns 25. The word granddaughter made Vivian flinch. She'd seen the society pages, watched as her former friends embraced Naomi as one of their own. The woman she'd tried to destroy was now being hailed as a business visionary, while Vivian Bradford had become a cautionary tale. Back at her office, Naomi reviewed property plans with her expanding team when Angela poked her head in. "You need to see this." She handed over her tablet, open to a society blog. The headline read, "Bradford heir reconnects with birth family, a story of love and redemption." The article detailed Ethan's journey to Seattle, his growing relationship with his birth mother's family, and his public apology for his role in Naomi's wedding humiliation. "He's finally free of her," Naomi said softly. Speaking of freedom, Angela sat on the edge of the desk. "How was your date last night?" Naomi smiled, thinking of dinner with Marcus Taylor, a corporate lawyer she'd met through Sarah. He was kind, successful, and completely removed from the Bradford drama. Most importantly, he looked at her like she was a miracle, not a scandal. "It was nice," she admitted. "He wants to take things slow, especially with the baby coming." "Smart man." Angela grinned. "And how's our little heiress doing today?" "Active, though she calms down when—" Naomi paused as her phone buzzed. "That's Ethan. We're finalizing the nursery details for his place." Their co-parenting relationship was evolving slowly, carefully. Weekly meetings with a family therapist helped them navigate the complex emotions and establish healthy boundaries. Rachel's presence had been unexpectedly healing. She understood better than anyone how Vivian's manipulation could destroy families. The next morning brought news that sent ripples through New York society. Vivian Bradford had accepted the plea deal. She would serve time for fraud and financial crimes, her reputation permanently destroyed. Ethan called as soon as the news broke. "Are you watching?" "Yes." Naomi touched her bump, feeling her daughter kick. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, better than I expected. Rachel's been amazing, helping me understand that Vivian's choices were never my fault." "She's right." Naomi paused. "Have you decided if you're going to visit her? In prison?" "Not yet. The therapist says there's no rush, that I need to focus on healing first." He was quiet for a moment. "And on being there for our daughter." Their conversation was interrupted by Naomi's assistant. "Ms. Thompson, the investors are ready for you." The meeting was about expanding Thompson Real Estate into Boston and Philadelphia. As Naomi presented her vision to the board, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Every attempt Vivian had made to destroy her had only made her stronger. That evening at a charity gala she'd once attended as Ethan's fiancée, Naomi commanded attention for a very different reason. Business leaders sought her insight, society matrons praised her resilience, and young entrepreneurs asked for mentoring. Marcus met her there, handsome in his tuxedo. "You're glowing," he said, kissing her cheek. "That's just the pregnancy," she laughed. but they both knew it was more. This was what real power looked like, not the fragile authority Vivian had wielded, but the genuine respect Naomi had earned. Later, as they shared a quiet moment on the balcony, Marcus asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Coming back from that day, fighting instead of running, Naomi thought about it. "I regret that my daughter will have to learn about all this someday, but no, I don't regret staying and building something of my own." "Your daughter's going to be proud," he said softly. Her mother's legacy is so much more than just a trust fund. The next day brought another milestone. The Bradford mansion, now completely renovated, hosted an open house. Naomi walked through the transformed space, remembering the first time she'd entered it as Ethan's girlfriend, feeling Vivian's disapproval, like a physical weight. Now the oppressive old-world opulence was gone, replaced by light, air, and modern elegance. The room where Vivian had plotted to destroy Naomi's wedding was now a stunning communal space. The study where she'd hidden Rachel's letters was a home office flooded with natural light. "It's perfect," her project manager said. "We already have offers on 4 units. Accept them all," Naomi decided, "and donate the commission to the domestic violence shelter we're building downtown." That night, during her weekly dinner with Angela, Naomi felt her daughter move particularly strongly. "She knows her mama's a badass," Angela declared. "Building an empire while growing a human? That's superhero stuff." Naomi laughed, but her friend's words struck home. She'd spent so long trying to prove herself worthy of the Bradford name only to realize she was building something far more valuable, a legacy of her own. The next morning, as snow fell softly outside her office window, Naomi received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded from the Bradford mansion, one last piece of mail that had slipped through. Inside was a photo of a young Vivian holding baby Ethan, along with a short note. "I wanted him to have everything. Remember that when you raise my granddaughter." Naomi studied the photo, seeing not the society maven who destroyed her wedding, but a young mother desperate to give her adopted son a perfect life. The cost of that desperation had been devastating, but perhaps there was a lesson in it. She placed the photo in her desk drawer and turned back to her work. There were properties to develop, communities to build, and a daughter to prepare for. The past, Vivian, the scandal, the broken dreams, could stay where it belonged. As if agreeing, her daughter kicked again. Naomi smiled, touching her. Bump. "I know, little one. We've got better things ahead of us." Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner tonight? That new place you mentioned?" Then another from Ethan. "Rachel finished the baby blanket. Can I drop it off tomorrow?" And finally one from Angela. "The shelter plans are approved. We break ground next month." Naomi looked out at the city skyline, her city now, in a way it never would have been as Mrs. Bradford. Every building, every street held memories of her journey from that devastating day at the altar to this moment of triumph. But it wasn't the kind of triumph Vivian would have understood. It wasn't about destroying enemies or maintaining appearances. It was about building something real, something lasting, something her daughter could be proud of. The society papers would talk about karma, about justice served. They'd call it the perfect revenge. The woman Vivian Bradford tried to destroy now owned her home, controlled her fortune, and had earned the respect she'd craved. But Naomi knew the truth. The real victory wasn't in Vivian's downfall or the Bradford fortune. It was in the strength she'd found, the empire she'd built, and the legacy she would pass on to her daughter. A legacy built not on lies and manipulation, but on resilience, determination, and the power of rising above those who tried to break you. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere in a prison cell, Vivian Bradford was learning to live with the consequences of her choices. Somewhere else, Ethan was building a new relationship with his birth family, healing old wounds. And here, in an office that symbolized everything she'd achieved, Naomi Thompson was writing her own story. One that didn't need the Bradford name to be remarkable. One that her daughter would be proud to continue. 5 years later, the grand ballroom. of the Four Seasons hummed with New York's elite as Naomi Thompson took the stage to accept her Woman of the Year award. At 35, she commanded attention not through inherited privilege, but earned respect. Thompson Real Estate Development had become a billion-dollar enterprise known for innovative community development and affordable housing initiatives. "Success isn't about proving others wrong," she told the crowd. "It's about proving yourself right." In the front row, her daughter Grace sat between Ethan and Marcus, her dark curls crowned with a ribbon that matched her mother's dress. At 5 years old, she was already showing signs of her mother's determination and her father's gentle heart. Marcus squeezed Grace's hand proudly. In the 3 years since he and Naomi had married, he'd become not just a stepfather to Grace, but a partner in creating the kind of blended family that defied conventional expectations. Ethan, now happily engaged to a pediatrician he'd met through Rachel, had found his own path to healing. Co-parenting Grace had taught him more about love and trust than 28 years of Vivian's manipulation ever had. As Naomi concluded her speech, her eyes found Angela in the crowd. Her best friend, now her company's chief operating officer, wiped away tears while filming everything on her phone. The celebration dinner afterward was intimate. Family and close friends gathered at Naomi and Marcus's penthouse apartment. Grace ran around showing everyone her latest art project, a family tree that included all the branches of her unique family: Mama and Marcus, Daddy and Lisa, Grandma Rachel, and her Seattle family. There was one name notably absent from that tree. Vivian Bradford had been released from prison 6 months ago. She lived quietly in a small apartment in Connecticut, her society queen days long behind her. The last time she'd tried to contact Ethan, his response had been clear and firm. "My family is complete without you." "Mama!" Grace called out, pulling Naomi from her thoughts. "Tell everyone about the new buildings." Naomi smiled, lifting her daughter onto her lap. "Well, since my CEO insists." The room laughed. Grace had taken to calling herself the chief. "Everything officer after spending time at the office. Thompson Development is breaking ground on our biggest project yet," Naomi announced. "An entire community development in the Bronx. Affordable housing, green spaces, community centers, and small business incubators. And a playground," Grace added importantly. "And a playground," Naomi confirmed, "because every child deserves a safe place to grow and dream." Later that evening, after Grace had fallen asleep and the guests had gone home, Naomi stood on her balcony with Marcus, looking out at the city lights. "Sometimes I still can't believe how everything turned out," she admitted. "That day at the altar, I thought my world was ending." Marcus wrapped his arms around her. "Instead, you built a better one." Inside, framed news articles told the story of her rise. Thompson Development revolutionizes urban housing. Former Bradford heir partners with birth mother in Seattle charity. Vivian Bradford released, a dynasty's downfall. But the true story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments. Grace's laughter as she played with her father and stepfather, Rachel flying in from Seattle for school plays and birthdays, Angela's unwavering friendship, and the love Naomi had found when she least expected it. The next morning, Naomi had a breakfast meeting with potential investors. As she presented her vision for urban development, one of them asked, "Aren't you worried about competition from Bradford Enterprises?" She smiled, remembering the company that had once seemed so intimidating. Bradford Enterprises was sold years ago, but more importantly, we're not in competition with anyone. We're creating our own path. That afternoon, she picked Grace up from kindergarten. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Good. I told everyone about your award, and about the buildings we're making for people who need homes." Naomi's heart swelled. This was her real legacy, not the properties or the awards, but the values she was passing on to her daughter. They stopped by the office, where Grace had her own small desk near Naomi's. As she colored, Naomi reviewed the latest project proposals with her team. "Ms. Thompson," her assistant interrupted, "there's a call from Seattle. Rachel wants to confirm the arrangements for Grace's summer visit." These cross-country visits had become a cherished tradition. Grace spent weeks with her grandmother and extended family, soaking in the love that Vivian's lies had nearly prevented. That evening, during their weekly family dinner, Ethan brought up the past, something he rarely did anymore. "I saw Mother yesterday," he said quietly, after Grace had gone to play. She was outside the old mansion. Naomi tensed slightly. The Bradford mansion had been converted into luxury condominiums, its imposing facade softened by modern touches. "Did she see you?" "Yes. She looks old, lonely." He shook his head. "But when she tried to talk to me, all I could think about was Grace, about how I never want her to experience that kind of manipulation." "She won't," Marcus said firmly. "She has too many people showing her what real love looks like." Later that night, as Naomi tucked Grace into bed, her daughter asked the question she'd been expecting for years. "Mama, why don't I have a grandma from Daddy's first family?" Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people make choices that hurt others, and when they do that, they lose the privilege of being family. But I have Grandma Rachel." "Yes, you do. And Marcus's parents and my Uncle Robert and Aunt Angela." Naomi smoothed her daughter's curls. "Family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who loves you and supports you." The next day brought news that Vivian had moved to Florida, a final retreat from the city she'd once ruled. The society pages barely noted her departure. She was old news, a footnote in Manhattan's history. At the groundbreaking ceremony for the Bronx development, Naomi stood with her family beside her. Grace wore a tiny hard hat. Marcus beamed with pride, and Ethan and Lisa chatted with Rachel, who'd flown in for the occasion. "5 years ago," Naomi told the gathered crowd, "I learned that sometimes life's biggest setbacks can lead to our greatest achievements. This development isn't just about buildings. It's about second chances, about creating opportunities for others to build their own dreams." As she drove home that evening, Grace chattering happily in the back seat about the new playground equipment she'd helped design, Naomi caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. She barely recognized the scared, heartbroken bride from that day at the altar. In her place was a woman who had turned humiliation into triumph, betrayal into strength, and loss into an empire. But more than that, she had created a family built on truth and love rather than manipulation and control. That night, as she worked in her home office, Grace brought her a drawing. It showed their entire extended family, Naomi and Marcus, Ethan and Lisa, Rachel and the Seattle relatives, Angela and her husband, all connected by lines of love rather than blood. "It's my real family tree," Grace announced proudly. Naomi hugged her daughter close, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. Vivian had tried to destroy her chance at happiness, but instead, she'd set Naomi free to create something far more precious than the Bradford legacy could ever have been. As she added the drawing to the wall of Grace's artwork, next to her business, awards and family photos, Naomi smiled. This was what victory really looked like. Not the fall of an enemy, but the rise of something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. The Bradford name might have faded into history, but the Thompson legacy was just beginning, and it was built on something far stronger than social status or inherited wealth. It was built on resilience, on forgiveness, on the power of choosing love over bitterness, built on the strength of a woman who refused to be broken, and the family that grew from her courage. That was a legacy worth passing on. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about destroying your enemies, but about rising so far above them that they become nothing more than a footnote in your legacy. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of triumph, transformation, and justice served in unexpected ways. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to never miss another story of sweet revenge turned into sweeter success.